writing a book like this is like walking through a dark forest. You helped me gain the strength to give this story a voice. And Neil was my guide, not just my story, but, a Marine story. Part of Darkhorse and what I love about Combat Story is the idea of like, do hard things, right? Seek uncomfortability. If you are uncomfortable, you are growing. Failure is oftentimes the first step of success. Over time, when you achieve your own individual success, whatever that looks like, is to turn around and make the next generation better than you.
Welcome to Combat Story. I'm AJ Pasciuti, a retired Marine, Force Recon, Scout Sniper, and Marine Gunner with 21 years of service, multiple combat tours, and a lifetime of lessons learned in the arena itself. On this show, I sit down with warriors from every front line to uncover what combat truly feels like and how it shapes the way we see life, each other, and ourselves. This is Combat Story.
Man, I want to give just initially massive shout out to the work you did on Morning Joe. Or like you nailed the commentary. Like the sound bites were perfect. I assume it was a one-shot deal. Like not.
That was it. I honestly,
Very
I thought,
good, man. Very
thank
good.
you. For me personally, like my mouth was like, super dry. I was like nervous, right? And I was feeling like I was finally catching my stride, like the second and third questions. The first one, I was like, like
No,
it was
it
kind of
truly did not see. I'm not bullshitting you. It did not seem like that at all. Truly.
Well, thank you.
It
Thank you
seems,
very much.
I was like, you must have rehearsed this 1,000 times.
So I think that what happens is, I do a lot of preparation. I know kind of what I want to say, but nothing is really soundbitey because I also want it to be, authentic. I know that there's going to be like, what is the book about? Or what's the name? How did you I know those kind of things. But I also really want to, what I've learned from you as an interviewer is to kind of let the interview flow and ask a question or very much listen to what the guest in our experience says and to reflect the question off of that. And so I kind of tried to pay attention to what he asked me and then, answer that accordingly. And he caught me, like, what is Memorial Day? Who are you thinking about? And I was like, oh, God.
Oh, man. And he caught you on that one. And you were like, had to compose yourself and then continue, which was awesome.
Yeah. Had to compose myself.
Okay. So we're less than a week removed from the release of the book. So what was like the 2 weeks prior to the book? And then let's talk the last 6 days. So what was the 2 to 3 weeks before the book launched like?
Honestly, it's been tough. It's been a lot. You have your whole life to build up to be able to write a memoir, right? And then what happens is Sarah and I made a commitment to one another and to the team. We said, we're going to leave it all on the field. Anything that we can do. What we want to do is like, if, for instance, it's hard because one, you pour yourself into writing this book to try to memorialize, try to encapsulate and capture everything that you want to. And we really think that between Neil, and myself, we really think that we produced something that was very impactful. The thing that now comes into play is you want to be able to get that into as many readers' hands as possible, not from the sales perspective, but from the spreading the word, perspective. And so a lot of that had to do, was very nerve-wracking. You have to be able to make sure all of this stuff is done correctly. So getting, form, all the salesy type stuff that I hate, right? Form emails, getting that out to contacts, texting everybody, telling them how to be able to kind of build a network inside of it. Sarah and I are exhausted. And so we were flying out to New York City, running. So it's hard because you're like elated that this thing is out there, that you've worked super hard to be able to get this to where it is. And we kind of look at each other and go, all right, well, the race begins now. And the gun goes off, right? You're like, okay, well, let's push. So we're very ready for June. We've kind of given ourselves, to kind of push hard. And then June, I will be sitting back, hopefully.
Actually, we were driving in the car and we were talking to our boys about it. And I mentioned you were on these morning shows and they're like, that's a big deal. And so Val was looking up on Amazon. Yeah, and you're like number one in several categories, like military veterans, Afghan war memoir, probably Iraq war memoirs. She's like, "Did Arnold Schwarzenegger write a blurb for him?" And I was like, "Yeah, yes, AJ
Yeah.
knows this crew. It's very
Yeah.
cool."
We were
Very
very fortunate for the Arnold Schwarzenegger piece, and honestly, the way that it happens is kind of the most, like, I would say, like, Hollywood-esque way of happening. So I've really made it a point over my entire career to try to be as respectful as possible to everyone that I've come across. And in 2012, I floated with a Marine, who was a Marine captain who served with the Force Recon Detachment, and he and his Marines were attachments to our platoon, and we just treated them with absolute respect. We're super kind with them. And how this kind of comes to fruition is he and I were on an airplane randomly together in 2020. We had kind of linked up again, and started talking. Through a long chain of events, his best friend is Arnold Schwarzenegger's chief of staff. And so it came to fruition of saying, like, I was nice to this guy, at this point, 15 years ago. And he said, "Hey, you were always great to me. Let me help call in a favor for you." And that got us in touch with Arnold Schwarzenegger. And then from there, it was just a couple of conversations, and he was very happy to provide an endorsement to it, which we were extremely gracious, or grateful for.
you in the book and what I know about you and the stories we've talked, like you weren't a pushover by any means in the Marine Corps. Like you held your own, right? And you had your scraps, but I would say what you're saying is in general, like you're for people who deserve the respect. But they still got respect, even if you were yelling at them. But there were some stories where you've had to put people in their place, I would say.
Very much so.
I think people might hear this and be like, "Well, AJ was just not like, no, no, no. You held the line at times where you needed to."
I always lead with respect. The thing that will kind of elevate my blood pressure is if you are disrespectful to people who are through the system not allowed to advocate back, or advocate for themselves. That's generally a trigger for me. And so, yeah, I've clapped a few people up if they needed it, right? And I've done it in a respectful manner as much as possible. But there's a joke where sometimes I have had a conversation where I've told another Marine, I'm like, this is where I transmit and you receive. And I've said those exact words on a number of occasions to people that really needed to hear it.
But it is a good lesson. Like along the way, 20, 30 years, like just be nice to people who deserve it because, it'll come back. All right. So the book is obviously, about how to be a dark horse in life and kind of work in the military and everything else that goes with it. Book's been out for 6 days. What are some of the questions you're getting from folks now that it's like out in the wild? Are you getting questions about vignettes or moments, or is it like what was it like writing the book? Or are they digging into parts of it? Anything new that's percolating up now that people have touched it?
Honestly, the number one question I get from people is, "How can I help?" I've been very surprised with a number of people who have kind of wrapped their arms around this and said, "This is fantastic." It's very scary, as you and I have talked to in the Marine culture and also in kind of the Army culture, is we always go back to the team. And so writing a book about, or writing a memoir, how do you not be a narcissist when writing a memoir, right? And so you have to be very cautious through that, especially when going on podcasts or long form interviews. I was super nervous from what the community, the recon, the sniper, the infantry, the Marine community writ large would think. And everyone's been super supportive because I think what I've tried to do is put our story at the center versus my story. And I think for any author, out there in the, prospective author, is when you're looking to tell a story, is I think that people are kind of tired of the self-aggrandizement, and they're really interested in, I think, people cooperating with one another, because I think that as systems evolve, and we see that, in our own, geopolitical space, is that we can't do this alone. We really need one another. And so writing a book like that has really pulled people together. I've had a couple of small conversations with guys who have said, "I haven't thought about this for years. It brought me back to this location." And the big thing I get from a lot of the guys that I've served with is, "Thank you. Thank you for representing us." I feel very grateful and very honored to have, not made an ass out of myself, in some of these interviews, and talked about, our love of one another in a different form.
I mean, even on the Morning Joe one, it was like, the host asked you, describe your military combat experience. And you're like, well, started at this age. And then it was like 20 years of in and out of combat, in Fallujah and Afghanistan. So I think it just immediately establishes your credibility. And I think it's great you're working with the MRF too. I mean, that's
Yeah.
for them to have like embraced you the way they have is probably a huge deal. So wait, when people ask you how they can help, what do you tell 'em?
I think the way that people can help the most right now is we are a first time publisher. We're a first time author in a space that is pretty well crowded by a lot of big names. The way that I have said, and this isn't a slight on the industry, but unfortunately, the way that the entertainment industry operates at any level is you're not valuable unless you're already valuable. And so, as a first time author with really no name recognition, nobody can pronounce my name clearly from
Yeah.
the interview this afternoon. Um,
Givens.
and so nobody knows who we are. And so we kind of fall down the algorithm in that space. The best thing to help us out is, I mean, obviously to purchase the book in any form, but also to write reviews. The reviews on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Goodreads are huge for us because what that does is one, it tells us that we have written something, Neil and I, it tells us that we have written something that has been impactful, but two, it really drives the engagement. So now what happens is it's kind of a positive feedback loop. The more book sales we get, the more reviews we get from those book sales, the more that they're going to want to incentivize people to buy those by putting discounts on or bringing it to the top of the fold on a website. So once the industry realizes that they can, I would say, benefit from the sale of the book or the spreading of the message, that really helps us out a whole bunch. And then also any of those things can be found on both combatstory.com and ajpasciuti.com.
I love the live stream you did, like all the questions you were getting. And I know Sarah and I were chatting back and forth, like how many women were asking questions, which is not the case for Combat Story. It was very heavily male demographic. So it is very cool with this book that I think you've got a lot of women reading it who are interested in this.
One of the things that I was not cautioned against, but when I was pitching the book or I was talking to publishers very, very early on, I talked about literary influences that had helped shape my writing style or the way that I saw the world. And one of those influences was a book by the author Kristen Hanna, and she wrote a book called The Women. And The Women is technically a historical fiction. It is a fictional storyline of a bunch of true stories of female nurses in Vietnam. And the way that she wrote that book, that showed me that women were interested in that type of story as well. So when we were writing the book, we wanted to make it as accessible as possible. You and I both know that we can get into a room and start talking in basically code to one another, and nobody else will really understand that. But those are, our acronyms become complete sentences. So I knew that writing a book, a sniper versus sniper or a force recon book, there is naturally going to be a male demographic of people who are going to purchase that. But I also wanted to show a little bit of empathy, compassion, or more of the emotional side of the realities of combat. And so I used a lot of fiction writers as a base, especially female fiction writers, to really understand how to be able to get that narrative across.
All right. So, and it's been like 6 months since this thing went to print, right? Like you couldn't touch it for, is it 6 months or is it longer now?
We finished it in, I would say, April of 2025. May of 2025 was like the last time that I could make major edits.
Okay. So you've had a year to sit with it. In that time, has there been anything where you're like, I forgot this one thing that I wish I could have put in there?
Yes. Yes. Honestly, what I realized, and I actually had to kind of talk myself because I have reread the thing, 9 separate times during different edits and copy edits and how we go through these things. And I want to make wholesale change every single time. So it's almost like an artist with a painting. You're never truly done. So fortunately, HarperCollins was very kind to remind me that there were no more major edits allowed to the book. But what I found was that the way that we wrote it in the first 6 chapters of the book, you kind of get to grow up with me as a person and as a writer. So the first 6 chapters are a little different in tone than they are in the latter, 2/3 of the book. One, because that's the framework that I was looking at the world. I was a young Marine. I was 18 to 21 years old at that time frame. And then as I, move into my 30s and eventually 40s, I'm being a little bit more retrospective and a little bit more introspective and being able to write about that as well. So the writing grows as I grew through the story itself. So it added another kind of fun layer. The first, firefights are heavy and chaotic, and I don't really know what's going on. And I'm running and literally tripping over myself. And later on, I'm able to talk about heavy geopolitical kind of situations, but with a little bit more nuance of having a larger worldview than just, my fire team.
And were there was like an event or two that you were like, I wish that could have gone in there?
Yeah, honestly, the chapter "The Worst Day of My Life" is it's very obviously near and dear to my heart, and I want to get that right, mostly because there's a lot of, dare I say, mystery to what happened with Matt
So
Ingham's
Matt,
team.
but yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so you start getting piecemeals. When I first went out to that, the surviving members of that team, they were at some level not necessarily cagey, but I'm asking them to rip open the scab from the worst day of their life as well. And so I sat and I talked with them as best as I could. And now what happens is, as I was able to describe those moments, they came back and said, yeah, I remember this. I remember, this happening or that sound. But to every single one of them, they have said, I haven't gotten anything wrong. So I was very happy with that. Um, I was studying James Patterson, and I watched a lot of master classes beforehand as well. And James Patterson's advice when writing a book specifically catered towards men was men were more interested in the mechanics of how an engine worked or how a weapon system operated. And as soon as you get that wrong for a male audience, you tend to lose them. And so a more of a female or younger audience is a lot of emotion inside of that. And then male audiences were a lot of like technical and tactical
Oh,
expertise, especially as an infantry weapons officer. If I had the nomenclature or the cycle of operations for weapon system gone, I would instantly lose credibility. I was fortunate that the director of the National Museum of the Marine Corps read the book, and I sent him and the director of the Marine Corps Heritage Foundation copies of the book, and they were very, very complimentary. But I was very happy to receive a little bit of feedback from the director of the National Museum of the Marine Corps. He was like, "Hey, just on a couple of things, there was a line here where you got this wrong, or you." So, for instance, one of the lines is, I said the word or the phrase field expedient. I said that the Marines built field expedient radios. And what I actually meant to say was a field expedient radio antenna. I forgot the word antenna, but it changes the entire meaning of the sentence. And so I've had a couple of like Force Recon Marines or the director of the National Museum of the Marine Corps being like, I think what you meant here was this.
wow.
Um, but the bullet's out of the gun. I can't do anything about it other than be like, I'll fix it if there's a second edition.
Okay. Then huge figure in the book is Gunny Jackson. You hadn't talked to him in over a decade?
Yeah, since
Before?
2012 was the last time that I
Yeah,
physically saw him.
13 years, something like
Yeah.
that, 14 years. And then you reconnected. How did you reconnect and what happened?
I I text the sergeant major of the Marine Corps. So I was like, well, why not? What are they going to do? Shave my head and send me to boot camp? So I got a chance to reach out to Sergeant Major Carlton Kent, one of the former sergeant majors of the Marine Corps. And I met him at a Marine Corps ball in Northern California. We became friends, and I said, hey, here's another sergeant major. Can you reach into your Rolodex and can you help me out? And he was able to go to headquarters Marine Corps and find the retirement, contact information and was able to find Ricky Jackson. And so I emailed him this just random email, being like, "Hey," and he emailed
Sweet.
back, and we had a couple of email exchanges. And as a matter of fact, he should have received his very first copy of the book today. So what I did was I made sure that I had a signed copy that I dedicated to him, and I sent it out to him before we took off on our trip. So he should have received it today. He does. He knows he's in the book, but I don't know that he knows to the level of which he's in the book,
Yeah.
or to the level of which he's affected my life.
Obviously, I hope this is a movie one day, and I hope he gets played by somebody badass.
Yeah,
That'll be
it'll
super
be a have to be a strong character to be able to take on that role.
cool. Okay. And then, so you were at Fort Campbell recently. Can you give people a sneak peek of what it was like being a Marine in like the home of Army Airborne Air Assault? The
Yeah.
82nd will just have to take a back seat for a moment.
Well, it was humbling. I've never been to Fort Campbell. I've never seen the size.
That's crazy to me. Yeah.
Never been. And so all of the storied units that are at Fort Campbell, the soldiers that I met with were just so kind and so happy. And really what I love about Combat Story, and I can't thank you enough for, um, I would say browbeating me for long enough to be able to take on Combat Story, is the power of just listening to other veterans' stories. These men came together for the 35th anniversary of Desert Storm, and they really were just so excited to be able to sit and have someone share their experience and hear their story. And so what we're excited to be building is, I really hope to be building this with you as well, is I want to do what we did with Dauntless Courage for Fallujah. I want to do that for Desert Storm. We have, gosh, how do I say it? First of the 327, I think is how you
Yeah.
say it.
Yeah.
And so again, even the naming conventions are, by the way, I asked literally every soldier, how do you guys do this? And they're like, we don't, they really don't know. Marine Corps, we can't count higher than 9. And so it's easier for us, but they were so kind to be able to, welcome me into their spaces, and have a conversation. So I really hope to be able to build, another, hour and a half documentary on Desert Storm. What I learned about that was, Desert Storm to me was always just like this kind of short blip on a radar. On my radar was 96
Yeah.
hours was the ground combat. What I learned from that was the reason it was 96 hours was because of the 15 years leading up to Desert Storm. The professionalization and the professional education of soldiers and Marines from both services. We had to come out of Vietnam and a conscript military, and the work of, in the Marine Corps service, General Al Gray, but the idea of, the chief of staff of the Army setting a long-term vision for the Army itself and working towards that for 15 years. And so what happens is now you have this perfect enemy match of a Soviet style enemy with a professional military. And of course, it only took 96 hours. It's because we had been preparing for that for 15 years and really changing the entire United States military for the perfect scenario. And so it was a culmination of a lot of strategic thinkers over, nearly 2 decades to be able to make that happen. And I can't wait to work with you to tell that story.
That's awesome. That is awesome. And I will say, because a little bit like we did with Dauntless Courage, where we went thanks to you to Pendleton and got to spend time with all these guys who were actually there. But on Combat Story, we had interviewed a few folks who had been in Fallujah in different ways with Elliot Ackerman and
David Benavides.
that's right, for Medal of Honor recipient. Right. So like there are a few other people who we could plug in with that. And I think with Desert Storm, we did this interview in the office with H.R. McMaster at Stanford at his office there. He's like the architect of Battle of 73 Easting. He goes on to be this, massive general, national security advisor. But he has one of the most epic battles of that entire fight, tank on tank. But he really describes the setup of the Gulf War, and like we didn't know, it very much felt, when I've talked to people who are in the Gulf War, they made it sound a lot like when you told me about you going over the berm, like going in for the first time, like you don't know what to expect. You're lined up, getting ready to go into enemy territory, and that's exactly how they were lined up. Gas masks. They didn't know what was going to happen, and they were like, "I don't know if I'm coming back," and they just happened to just mow people down and come out.
Right.
After several days. Obviously, a little bit different with your experience, but I do think that moment before you go in was very similar.
Exactly. Someone described to me, they actually texted me today. They were like, yeah, they sent us a picture of us wearing the mop suits and the same thing that they wore in Desert Storm in a lot of ways. And they described it as saying, clearing houses wearing snowboard outfits. And I was like, that totally
Yeah.
makes sense. I've never thought of it. But a mop suit is exactly that. It's just an airtight snowboarding outfit. And so in the desert of all
Yeah.
places, really shows a testament to the service members that we've had of every single generation. And I really, really hope to be able to tie all of this together as eloquently as you were able to do with Dauntless Courage, and kind of pull this out to show the world, how great of a victory Desert Storm was for the United States.
Yeah. All right. So you've got episodes you've recorded, you got new ones coming up, you got, this documentary, Darkhorse. Let's talk just a little bit about this. And not even as a plug, but I do think the thing that you've done that I am so jealous and grateful of is the community you're building, right? So you've got Darkhorse as kind of the landing page. We put combat story in there as well, but you've got a place where people can come together. What's the vision in this thing? And I'm genuinely saying this because I think there are a lot of people who want these communities that aren't all about like me, and I'm the toughest person around. And I think this is like the place if you gravitate to like humility and being in a place that wants to help others, this is the place to go. So I want to actually hear it from you.
I appreciate that. Yeah, we've kind of got this idea of an ethos, right? Is this kind of, one of the models that we're talking about is like this dark horse ethos is like, I think that the triad, if you will, is the first thing I want to be able to, part of Dark Horse. And what I love about Combat Story is every single guest kind of gets to this in some level, is the first thing for any young, American, or any young person across the world, is the first thing that we want to be able to inculcate is the idea of like, do hard things, right? Like seek uncomfortability. If you are uncomfortable, you are growing. The second is that failure is oftentimes the first step of success. And then the third thing is that after time, over time, when you achieve your own individual success, whatever that looks like, is to turn around and make the next generation better than you. And so what we're trying to do is provide a place. We have a little small corner of the internet, right? The world is a weird place in a lot of different ways, and what we recognize that we're not naive to that. But what we say is, okay, we're not interested in sensationalism. We're not interested in putting other veterans down, right? What we're interested in doing is building a community of people, veterans and non-veterans, that want to work towards a better world of where we look at each other, not for our weaknesses, but for our strengths, and try to be able to build each other up. And so we hope that that can work. Now, again, we don't know what the final product looks like. We have an idea of where this thing goes, but it will be what we hope to be is community driven, to try to, well, why not, have a little bit of audacity in the idea of saying, well, why not? We don't know what's going to happen with this thing, but let's try to make the world a little bit better place if we can along the way.
So if people sign up, what are they doing in this community? What do you envision for them?
So right now, the first thing that we can do is create a newsletter, right? So like the newsletter that we have is to be able to put what we see and to highlight. I think that what we can do is, again, I exist on the internet just like anybody else does. And I am not naive to the fact that the internet can be sensational. It can be relatively negative. As human beings, we tend to be drawn towards negative headlines or, some sort of, negative, outlook or outcome. So we want to try to be as positive, not like cheerleaders, but try to be able to say there is good out there, and there is good with community coming together. The first step for us is this idea of a newsletter that we can put that out into the world and share some of these great stories. The second thing that we want to do is eventually create kind of this movement of, I don't know, being a good person for the sake of being a good person, following that triad, right? Do hard things, accept failure as a process in success, and then make the world a better place or make the next generation better. How we do that? Well, maybe the community can help us decide that. Maybe it's an idea of a hashtag of be a dark horse, right? Or, try to do something good. I was always really taken back when I was a kid with, Oprah Winfrey did this pay it forward or random acts of kindness. I remember in, Northern California, forgive the hat, any of my Northern California fans, is that people would buy coffee for the car behind them. People would pay a bridge toll for the car behind them. That's just recognizing that we exist in a world with other people. The idea of putting a shopping cart back, the whole
Yeah.
idea of putting a shopping cart back is a completely selfless act. And if we can get people just to recognize that nobody is coming to save us, that we are all each other has, we can be a lot less divisive and a lot less, I would say, corrosive towards the collective.
Yeah, love that. I mean, and we're working with Neil now on writing a book for me and my dad that people on Combat Story have heard us talking about. And I'm not excited about the pain that comes with this because I've watched you go through it. So like we're getting into that. But I do think as I kind of look at my dad's life and my own, and we're kind of looking at 40 years apart, but I do think it's a very American story, but it very much is doing hard things and like seeking adventure to help people in different ways. And um, I do hope that that's what people get from your book. Like you were an 18-year-old setting sail from the West Coast of the US, going to places unknown for years and
Yeah.
jumping out of planes. Like I was telling somebody the other day about there was some fast roping. I think did the Marines fast rope onto some vessels in the Strait of Hormuz recently, like maybe 2 weeks ago?
Ye
They took
yes, and
they took
there's
a
a
vessel,
lot of, like, and those are my boys. Those are all my boys.
but you fell off the fast rope, right?
Why you gotta bring up old stuff, man?
How far did you fall again? Because I was like, I think it was like 60 feet, but
Y it
I
it
don't know.
was a lot, I wasn't keeping track as I was, plummeting from the rope, but, we're in sea state, and the helicopters, as you know, can they hover, and that can change, so the estimate was around 20 feet, and it could be 25 feet or whatnot, but I do remember, gaining some speed and, like, knowing that I was falling before I was abruptly, on the I was one of the last people out of the aircraft and one of the first people on the ground, if that makes sense.
You're so impatient, man. And did you break your back? What did you
I
do again?
I fractured my C4, C5 vertebrae, and everyone was like, "You were a quarter of an inch away from being paralyzed." And you know what? My terrible team, they gave me no quarter. Like, I remember, getting up off the deck and like, heaving, and they're looking at me like, "What are you doing?" Right? Like, "Let's go." And I'm like, "Ah," trying to
Oh,
figure myself out as we're moving to, the next objective. So again, doing hard things, when we talk empathy and compassion, I don't want people to think that, we're the Marines are getting in like tickle fights with each other. Like it's still the Marine Corps, right? Like these are hard men and hard women, and they are built of brick and stone, and they have to be able to do what we're doing. But that doesn't mean we have to be callous. And so it's people would be surprised if they were able to, see the text messages that I'm getting from people. A lot of it is, "I love you, brother. Thank you so much." Right? You have said the things that needed to be said about our community and our culture. So we're not just running around punching each other in the chest all day. Like it is an organization of tough men and women who do a job, but they absolutely love one another, and that brotherhood and that sisterhood is absolutely palpable, and it is real.
that is awesome. All right. What's coming up that's exciting you before we wrap up here?
Right now, a break is exciting me. No, so
You're on
Sarah and
another
I,
morning show this week.
yes,
So yeah, so like you got that.
yeah. So we have Brian Kilmeade. So we did MS Now. We did Morning Joe today on Memorial Day, and then we have Brian Kilmeade on Fox News on Thursday. And
There's
so how this helps is to continue to, I would say spread awareness naturally for the book, but also I believe for this movement. This whole thing, Sarah is very good with me. She doesn't let me read a lot of the comments, and I do appreciate that because I don't want now on Combat Story. It's very different. I read all of the comments on Combat Story because that is a brand that we want to protect, and we're also a learning organization. So sometimes people will say this: the audio was off, or I talk too much, right, or whatever the thing is, and we're like, okay, thank you. Like that. We're a learning organization. But when, for instance, I went on to Sean Ryan, and that was a very, very long interview. And ultimately, like if I were to go down the comment threads on there, I could start to spiral. Fortunately, because there's just people out there that are unhappy with themselves or the world, and they want to be able to spread that unhappiness. And so we have to kind of protect our space in that. Sarah does read a lot of those things, and she's very, very kind. And what she'll do is she'll show me some of the good ones to kind of it is draining to, to go out and expose your soul, to people, and expose who you are, and, at a cellular level, and hope that the world is kind to you. And so, even though I was a sniper and all this kind of stuff, like, I'm still a human being, right? And words do matter. And so we want to be able to make sure that we're putting out a little bit of goodness into the world. So this week we have that, and then the next on Thursday we have a book event in Connecticut with Neil at Fairfield University, and then we're heading to Georgetown University, which is your alma mater, and then we'll be heading to the National Museum of the Marine Corps to work with some of the docents and the director of the museum. And then my alma mater, University of Southern California, is looking to host an event in Southern California in probably 2 to 3 weeks as well.
Damn.
Yeah.
I am so pumped for you and Sarah and Neil. Man, so glad this is happening. Thanks for letting me be a little part of it. And thank you for shepherding and continuing to do amazing work with Combat Story, which I'm beyond grateful. Man,
Well,
truly.
because I am a host now too, I do know when to be able to steal the microphone. You were more than a small part of it, Ryan. You were the start of it. And to any person out there, Ryan was the driving force behind this, and I'm very, very open about that. I would not have put this story into the world if you did not, again, browbeat me into doing it. And I really do appreciate, we as Marines have always tried to train ourselves to be extremely humble and extremely gracious and give everything back to the team. And sometimes, the recon motto, one of them is silent professionals. And at times, what can happen is we can be detrimental to our own cause is because we are so silent. So, you helped me gain the strength to give this story a voice and to give it and to breathe life into this, to tell not just my story, but, a Marine story, and
Totally.
and tell
Yeah.
the world that, America is worth fighting for.
Yeah. And it is Memorial Day, and there's like, Greg and Matt and all these people that come up in the story, of course. So I'm sure like being in New York is no small thing with 9/11 and your background. So
One World Trade Center is right over my left shoulder, and it is not lost on me. Neil and I will be getting together again on Wednesday to spend some time together, and we're going to do a picture. Neil and I, gosh, Neil has been so fantastic through this because of, what I realized was that, writing a book like this is like walking through a dark forest. And Neil was my guide. And he was a mentor through this, understanding the whole, ecosystem around this, and was able to kind of shepherd me through that. And I'm really glad that he's going to be able to do the same with you, because I think that your story is also an American story, and so fantastic and so great to hear that our stories are different, but exactly the same in so many ways. And I love it. And that's what makes us so unique as a country is for us to come from all these different places and walks of life and believe in the one true thing is that we're stronger together. And I wouldn't have done this without you.
I miss you guys. Have a
You
good
got
one. Good luck this week, man. We'll be watching from the West Coast.
May I ask? So my producer over here is imploring me to ask, what are you up to? What is coming up with you?
What am I up to? So let's see, we're working restricted handling. So that's what you've given me space to go do and talk about authoritarian regimes all over the world doing things that are pretty terrible. So Glenn Korn, who's my co-host, he and I have been interviewing folks every week. I just did a deep dive on China that we released yesterday. Very interesting. Guy who spent 20 years at the U.S. Naval post-grad school teaching China, Russia, military, a lot of Navy. But we just went deep on the Trump-Xi summit. Xi hosted Putin. So really going deep there. Glenn, my co-host, is over in Eastern Europe. He goes over there occasionally to advise the Ukrainians on how to win this war, which is fascinating. So I feel like, once again, I'm doing my very small part where I can fit in to just pull the rug out, or at least shine a light on some of the terrible things that these regimes do. And we've got a pretty sweet vacation coming up this summer, taking the family over to Europe. Going to do 2 weeks over in Western Europe, which is our like go-to place. But at some point I need to go to Asia, and I probably need to ask you before I go to Japan, because I'm sure you
Yeah.
time limit. So that'll probably be next year where I tap you to see where do we go for that.
Absolutely. Have you come up with the title for your book yet?
No, but I do have one that I'm thinking about, man. Have not verbalized this at all. So don't tell Neil this. Hopefully Neil will listen.
Your secret's safe with me.
Yeah, I know. just the two of us ladies talking here. We had initially, like, for all the proposals and everything, had been the skies we shared for my dad and I, because really anchoring on the aviation component, him from Vietnam, me from Afghanistan. But that's a portion of the book. And then the other portion is both of us working in the national security space. Him at State Department, me at the CIA. And so I don't want it to just be aviation related. So I kind of need to adjust it. But I do think there's something about perspective here where we're looking across 40 years and generations, and what it was like going to war for him versus me, and coming back from war for him versus me, which is very different. And he lived like not far from where you're sitting right now, growing up. So I think I could see something with perspective being in the title. And because part of it is we fought all these wars, man, for all these years, and all these people you and I have now interviewed on Combat Story. And so many of us did what we did because of information that we got a hold of at some point. And I just think like there's this information war that has been moving forever. And I don't think I realized it until much later in my career. And as I look back on my dad's career and mine, like the information warfare that has been going on had nothing to do with bullets. But many of the people, myself included, who joined the military, like it was for many reasons, but some of it was poster we saw, a movie we watched, a book we read, a story we were told. And I think there's something about perspective that comes up. So I'm going to try to weave perspective into it somehow.
I do appreciate that. Yeah, the title Darkhorse, it was not the initial title of the book. And sometimes you're just writing, and all of a sudden you're like, that's it.
It's a great one.
There it is. Well, I wish you the best on your writing journey. I'm happy to help with some of the tools that I used along the way and things that helped me out. But boy, that was an experience that I don't know if I want to go through that.
Right near you. I'm right in the middle of it.
Well, I'm very proud of you. It takes a strong person to be able to take a good look at themselves. And then I think it takes a really strong person to be able to kind of try to write that down. And I think that yours and your father's story is one of lineage and legacy. And I really, really can't wait to be a part of that.
Thanks a lot, man. Good luck this week and in the coming weeks.
Thanks so much, Ryan. Appreciate it.